Welcome to the Rusted Garden Homestead. This is my first video in a series I'm doing for 2020 on composting. Composting is the best way to add nutrients to your garden, save you money, and really grow healthy plants. It's free. Cost is your labor. These pallets and everything you see here, I got either free or at a discount, or they were scrap wood. Now I want to get to the facts. And that's what this whole series is going to be about. This is not about getting compost made in 30 days or getting it done in 6 weeks, or everything has to be hot composted and all you're worried about is speed. We're going to let nature do the work and we're going to help it along. Now, the number one reason people don't have compost is because they don't get started. We get overwhelmed reading about it. We don't collect the materials. We don't get started. So what I suggest is you don't worry about ratios, you don't worry about a setup like this. Start piles. You want to start collecting browns, which have carbon, which is typically leaves, and you want to start collecting grass clippings, which is your nitrogen. If you let your grass clippings dry out on like a tarp or something like that for a couple of days, and then you pile them, they tend not to smell. But you need the components and you need to get started, and that's really what this video is about, is getting started. So you see a couple kinds of setups. If you want to make something out of pallets, they're usually free or a couple of bucks, you can get them. You want to set it up so that it's about 4 feet by 4 feet wide. Mine are closer to 3 feet, 3.5 feet wide. You just want something like that for your space. You want your pile to be able to get up to 4 or 5 feet. That gives you enough material for your compost pile to start heating up. Now, we're going to talk about hot composting. That's when you get your temperatures up to 130, 160 degrees during this series, but we're not going to talk about that at length today. You can just go on Amazon. This is where I got this. This is 4 feet by 4 feet, probably maybe a little higher than 4 feet. It was a dog cage. It was only 25 bucks. It works perfect. Stuff on the bottom is from the end of last year. Stuff in the middle and top I just put on, and you can see that I'm layering browns and greens, and the stuff down at the bottom is starting to break down. This is a complete cold compost pile. I'm not mixing the ratios in any way for this to warm up or heat up. I'm just letting nature break it down, and this is a perfectly fine way to compost. Put your materials in there, let it break down. It'll probably take about a year, full season, spring, summer, fall, winter, spring again. You can go to something like this. I have a 2 pallet station so that as this breaks down, I will, turn it, aerate it, move it over there. One of the keys to compost is making sure there's air circulating through there. Keep the process active. Now, right in there is I don't know if you can easily see it. Let's see. Is a compost thermometer, and it's at 120 degrees almost. It's starting to heat up. Now, the way you make hot compost, the heat is the bacteria breaking down your materials. They give off heat, and that's how you know that it's really, really active. So if you go online, you're going to see things about different ratios for carbons and nitrogen. It's called the carbon to nitrogen ratio, and it can be really, really confusing. For instance, each piece of organic matter on a planet has a carbon to nitrogen ratio. Like wood is like 700 carbon to 1 nitrogen, just the wood itself. I don't know the ratio for grass, but let's just say it's 30 to 1. And then maybe leaves, you have it something like 80 to 1. And then you read that you want your compost pile to be a 2 to 1 ratio. All those ratios just get confusing. I recommend paying little attention to it, because this is what works. You're going to layer in browns, either straw or leaves, that's what people have most access to, with grass. So it'd be like browns, greens, browns, greens, browns, greens, and you just make layers. You'll see, if you look online again, you'll see the ratio of greens to browns, green grass, food scraps to leaves, straw. You might see a 2 to 1 ratio, twice as much green to 1 brown. Then you might see 4 browns to 1 green. It's very, very confusing. And why is this first video really about just collecting the materials? Because That is what inhibits people from really having compost, is that we just don't get started. This pile is more greens than browns. The pile that we just walked away from with the thermometer in were actually equal parts of greens and browns. Leaves, grass, leaves, grass. That's just grass in there breaking down. This will be filled up later. You can also, if you don't want to set up something like you just saw with the compost metal pen or the pallets, you can get compost tumblers. And this is probably a great way to get started. The ratio that I have in here, let's see if I can spin this with one hand, is actually 3 greens to 2 browns, and I'm using wood. Wood is harder to kind of compost down because it has a really, really high carbon ratio, but it's starting to break down. It's a little bit wet, but when you squeeze it, no drops come out. That's the kind of goal you're going for, is you don't want your compost to be overly saturated. That's kind of cool. It's not heating up. I could add in more grass, more nitrogen. That would heat up. But this is about 2 weeks old, and it's really starting to break down. My goal with this, just on the side note, is to really have partially broken down compost that I'll be using for mulch. But you can use the tumblers. You can build something like this. You don't need 5. You could just go with 1. You could go with 2. If you don't want to spend any money, just go ahead and do a pile. If you're going to do a pile, I like keeping it about 5 feet, 6 feet wide, I guess. You know, this is probably 6 by 4, maybe 3 feet high. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't want your compost piles to be soaking wet. That's why I built the roofing on top of my pallets, so that they still do get moisture, but a lot of the water, you know, is directed away. And then I'm using tarps here. Now, when you make a pile like this, if you layer it browns, greens, it will heat up. You're also going to see lots of worms in there. There's one, there's one, there's one, there's another one, there's another one. This is warm. It's probably about not even 100 degrees. It's 50 degrees right now. The earthworms, soil microbiology, Mother Nature is breaking this down. Again, my point is you don't have to worry about getting this to 130, 160 degrees. Just start collecting the materials, and if you can collect them in equal amounts, you know, rotate brown, green, brown, green, brown, green. That will get the process started. This may take 3 months. It may take 6 months. This is my experimental piece right here where I'm trying to get it up to 130 degrees. Hot composting is typically between 130 to 160 degrees. That breaks down the materials, also kills off weed seeds. That's one way to go about it. But you don't have to strive to make this happen. Just collect your materials, get it in the bins. Collect your materials, get it in a pile. If you want to build something a little more elaborate, you could build something like this. Or again, we can walk down, you can do the compost bins. Now in the series, I'm going to break down how to use, you know, the pallet system. I'll go over ratios where I can get this up to 130, 160 degrees. I'll show you the progress of compost. This is really what I call warm composting. It's not staying at temperatures out here. It's hanging around 100 degrees or so, breaking down pretty fast, but it's not going to be ready, you know, for 3 months, for 6 months. The tumblers are a great way to really get things going and get that hot composting going, and you can seal it, keeps odors down. Last thing I want to mention is when you start composting, if your pile stays cool, like if you stick your hand in there and it really feels like at the temperature outside, it doesn't feel warm at all, it's because you don't have enough greens, you don't have enough nitrogen in there. So if you want your pile to heat up more, maybe you have too many leaves, just mix in more grass, more fresh cut grass, we'll add in more nitrogen. That's going to start the hot composting process, and that will get the bacteria thriving a little bit more. If your pile smells really bad like ammonia, that means you have way too much green in there. And like if you put a pile of grass down, you let it just sit there and it starts to decay, and then you go and you kick it, you smell this terrible odor. Too much nitrogen. That means you would have to add in more hay, more leaves, mix it up, gets rid of the odor, it gives a nice balance. The bacteria that breaks down your organic matter wants a combination of browns, carbons, and greens, nitrogens. You can do it slowly, and I think we'll end it here, with just cold composting, just layering it on as you get it. Let nature break it down. This is a mix of everything. It's breaking down. You see all the worms that are going through there. And this is really from the end of last year, maybe when I was ripping out stuff in November, December. So that's starting to break down. That's fresh grass on top. This is more of a 1-to-1 ratio, just browns, greens, browns, greens, browns, greens. It's breaking down. And you get the point. The reason that I wanted to start the first video very general is because the reason people don't end up with compost is they just don't get started. Start collecting your materials, your leaves, your grasses, weeds. Put them in a place that you can either use them soon or you're going to use them later. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe to my channel and we'll start breaking down composting in all different ways.